Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're continuing our series of the patriarchs by examining Joseph and his dreams. Now, if you remember last time we talked about the children of we talked about the children of Jacob, how even though Jacob had turned it turned it began it turned to a life from a life of trying to take matters in his own hands and this and bring about the what he knew was the will of God, what was the will of God, but more importantly to him what he wanted through his own power, had turned from that and began trusting God instead. And no, and one nothing to do with more deceitfulness. Now God given because God had given him a painful reminder every time he took a step with his dislocated hip. And he was a changed man, but how unfortunately for most of his children, he had already raised them and he had already screwed them up. And how they behaved was generally badly. We saw they were involved in they were fornicating, murdering innocent people. They deception, breaking their not breaking their oaths, and all kinds of other wickedness. In fact, his grandchildren were so bad that so they did wicked in the eyes of the Lord. The same expression he used about the people in the days of Noah and in Sodom and Gomorrah. And God killed him, killed this grandson exactly for that reason. Just he got rid of the people before the flood, in the days of Noah, and the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were no better, and indeed arguably worse, because we saw that how Tamar who had married him was more noble than Judah in their efforts to provide seed for her dead husbands, and and how Shechem was more noble than the house of his father, but also than the children of Jacob. But there's another child we're going to talk about today that we did not cover last week. One who was born when Jacob came over, when Jacob when one was born when Jacob was only 6 years old, when Jacob became a changed man. And also another child we talked about last week, all his mention was he was born, was Benjamin. So Benjamin and Joseph are going to be raised completely different than the other children of Jacob, and their behavior is going to show it. And we're going to really focus on Joseph today, and begin seeing his very different, sterling character in association with a series of dreams that he and others have. So today we're talking about Joseph and the dreams. And when we begin here in Genesis 37, in verses 1 through 4. And Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding his flock with his brethren. The lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wife. Joseph being brought unto his father an evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. Okay, so right away we see a different character. We see the difference in character of Joseph here, as opposed to the sons of Bilhah. Bilhah being the previous handmaid that became the wife of Jacob through the workings of Leah. I mean of Rechab. I'm sorry, Rachel or Rachel, whichever you prefer, and Zilpah, that former handmaiden of Leah. So that's four of his sons that we really didn't look at last year. But what do we find about these four sons? We find out two things about in the contrast to Joseph. First of all, he brought their evil report. He went to see on how they were doing, and they were doing evilly. But notice Joseph's character. Joseph faithfully reports this to his father. They, of course, are not happy about that. But now Jacob is bringing trouble on Joseph through through his own bad behavior here. He favors Joseph. And why? Is it because of his good character we just talked about? No, if he done that, then that would have incented his brothers to do well, it, to change their behavior. No, but because he was a son of his old age. Before Benjamin was born, he was the last one born. He was the last one born. Jacob was 91 years old, as we showed when it, and also he's the son of Rachel, Rachel, the wife, the one wife he wanted to marry. We talked about the wives of Jacob, how Jacob really wanted to marry one woman, ended up with four because of these various schemings and mechanisms of other people. Trouble coming back on him that he had he sown as part of what he sown and coming back on him. And this led to trouble. Their brothers couldn't change who their mother was. They couldn't. This wasn't about his character. This was about something they had no control over. And he made them this coat of many colors. He made them a coat that, colors were expensive back then. Some colors were really expensive, like blue often was. And so he's made him this expensive coat to show that he favors his son above all the others. Now, what was the reaction of his brothers, who were not good people to start with? It caused them to hate him, and they couldn't speak peacefully to Joseph. They could find no good thing to say to him. And again, this is not Joseph's fault. It's Jacob's fault. And he's not, again, rewarding Joseph for good behavior, even though he's for good character, except even though Joseph's demonstrated that. It's totally favoritism. In the Torah, we're told God tells Israel, "I do not regard the person of anyone." And Peter finally gets it a couple thousand years later. God has shown me that he's no respecter of persons, even though that's said several times of the prophets as well. And in James, we're warned, do not be a respecter of persons. Well, Jacob has violated that. Joseph, and there's going to be some repercussions for that as well. Make no mistake, you will reap what you sow. God is not mocked. And the repercussion, the immediate one, is he's caused his other sons to hate his favorite son. But now things are about to get worse for Joseph in that regard, as we continue on Genesis 37, verses 5 through 11. Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brother, and they hated him yet the more. He said to them, I hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. Lo, my sheep rose and stood upright, and behold, your sheep stood round about and made obeisance to my sheep. And his brother said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed another dream and told his brother, and behold, I've dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun, the moon, the 11 stars made obeisance to me. He told to his father and to his brother, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what dream has he dreamed? Shall I and your mother indeed come and bow ourselves to thee to the earth? Okay, so now Joseph has this dream, which of course he couldn't help, but he makes a mistake here. It's something unwise. He told it to his brethren. And there's a lesson for us. Be careful who you share your dreams with. Don't tell your dreams to everyone. Remember, his brother, as we demonstrated last week, are people of bad behavior, bad character. I mean, honestly. And unfortunately, they're like, there's Benjamin and Joseph. Benjamin, nothing particularly is ever shown about his character being bad among the sons of Jacob. Joseph's shown a sterling character. And the other 10, plus the one named sister, Dinah, are shown to all have bad character. And it's thus it is today with the Jewish people. Those who've turned to Messiah are going to have this sterling character like Joseph. And there may be some others like Benjamin, who uh, generally they're pretty religious or something like that, and they may keep away from doing do a lot of bad things. But the majority of Israelis today, I mean, Tel Aviv is as wicked as any American city, and a lot of Jews have a reputation they've earned of doing wickedly. It's not just the ranting of anti-Semites; their behavior shows this. Now, again, not all Jews. I'm not saying all Jews are evil. You know, Jesus was a Jew. The apostles were Jew. So on, Moses, so on and so forth. But a number are they're not. And the Bible itself says about the Israelites at one point that they became worse than the inhabitants of Canaan that God kicked out. And without Messiah, the natural bent of man is evil. Without the Spirit of God there, and you only get there through Messiah. And if you reject Messiah, this is what's bound to happen. So there's a little lesson there for us, in this business. And so you don't want to be telling people who are ungodly, Jewish or not, about everything God shows you. You're casting pearls before swine, as Messiah put it. They'll turn and rend you. They won't appreciate it, and they'll perhaps even hate you for it. And that's what Joseph's doing here. It's unwise of him. Now we can speculate on why he did it, but we don't really know why he told him. I mean, he's perhaps excited. He's wants this. He's thinking, he has this dream, and it's kind of strange. And he maybe doesn't understand himself yet, or perhaps he does, but he won't tell them. But notice his brothers. They don't like him for this. They hate him more for it. And they understand this dream right away. That that they're going to have to. This dream is about them bowing themselves down before him and him reigning over them. And so it is with the world. The world. Jesus, the Jewish people will one day bow down to Jesus, Yeshua. He's going to reign, just like they pushed Moses away, said, "Who made you a ruler, a judge, and ruler over us?" So they'll say to Messiah, and that's what we see going on here with Joseph. Okay, and it's true, but it's true for us also. Our family members, particularly, are subject to rejecting us because we are going to rule as priests and kings one day, and we're going to rule over those who don't, who aren't over everyone else, and everyone else doesn't want, everyone else does not like this because the world doesn't want to be ruled. The wicked do not want to be ruled by the righteous, and that's the bottom line here. So that's more reason they hate him, not just because he's their younger brother. And now notice his father and the mother. Now notice here, how does this represent the house of Israel? Okay, remember in Revelation, they see the sign of the woman of a woman standing over the moon, clothed in the sun, with 12 stars above her. We know that's Israel. We know this from other passages talking about what happens to that woman. That this is indeed an image of Israel. So this about the rest of Israel is bowing down as far as his mother. Well, his mother's dead, Rachel. So Leah is probably taking over acting as a mother to him, being as she is Rachel's biological sister. If not her, Bilhah would have, because of being the handmaiden thing. But it's probably Leah being in the closer relationship to Rachel physically. So whoever, regardless, they're going to come and bow down to him. So his father understands this and rebukes him. No one has thought to ask God about this. In that regard, no one thought, is this dream from God? Except perhaps Joseph. But be careful who you tell your dreams to. Now, we continue on Genesis 37, verses 12 through 17. We read the following. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, do not your brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come and I will send you to them. And he said, here am I. He said to him, go, I pray you, see whether it be well with your brethren and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. He found a certain man, behold, his wire in the field, and the man asked him, saying, What seek you? He said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray you, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, they departed from here, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. Okay, remember, Shechem is where Jacob had formerly tried to, in that area where he made Sukkot booths. He formerly should have settled down and built a house and stuff, tried to live in peace, but his sons ruined that for him with their bad behavior. But now they're back there. And notice that the man doesn't even this is his brethren. Joseph does not look like the other people. His brethren don't. So the man, he didn't have to tell the man his name or their names or anything. And the man did this. He got to Shechem. They're just not there. And Joseph faithfully follows the Dothan. Why? He's following the instructions of his father. Okay. His father had sent him. Why did his father send him? He's already shown himself to be faithful. To give an honest report. So now he's wanting to know how they're doing. Jacob, remember we saw last week, Jacob knew there were idols in his camp and got rid of them. He knows he screwed his children up. He screwed up raising them. And he knows Joseph can be trusted, but they can't. So he wants to know how they're doing. And Joseph is faithful to carry out the will of his father, just like Messiah was faithful to carry out the will of his father. To go where his father sent him, to say, Hanani, here am I, when he sent him into the world. Now we continue on in Genesis 37, in verses 18 to 24, read the following. When they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to slay him. They said to one another, behold, this dreamer comes. And come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and we'll say, some evil beasts devoured him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness. Lay no hand upon him, that he might rid them of their hands to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass when Joseph was come to his brethren, they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that was on him. They took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. Okay, so they notice there's absolutely no faith this dream is from God, but maybe a little concerned it might come to pass. So their ideal is, if we kill him, it certainly can't come to pass. They don't acknowledge this from God. If it's from God, they certainly acknowledge it. If it was, they can't stop it from occurring. Any more than Esau and Jacob couldn't stop Jacob and Isaac. I should say maybe Esau and Isaac couldn't stop God's will from occurring. And Rebecca and Jacob, or Rivka, if you prefer to use the Hebrew, couldn't make it occur. When God determines to do something, he will cause it to bring about in his time, in his way. But they do not discern that. And they got this useless ideal that they can somehow prevent it from occurring. Now, Reuben is showing himself. He's supposes first of all, he's got concern for his brother, and notice he wants to live him to his father again, perhaps to look good in his father's eyes. Because remember, he's not good in his father's eyes. He went up he went up with Bilhah, who's probably perhaps 20 years older than him or something. When he went up there and had sex with her after Rachel had died, and and his father knew it. And his father knew it. We're told, but again, it really can't take it. He can't take action because of his own bad behavior. His kids are just going to throw it in his face. You know, he's kind of lost his moral authority in that regard because of his former bad behavior. So perhaps Reuben just wants to look better in his father's eyes. Things be right between him and dad. So he wants to deliver it. And he also just does not want to kill. But notice he's not just standing up and saying to his brethren, over my dead body, He's not absolutely he's operating like Jacob. He's trying to do this through deception and subtlety, okay? And deliver him that way. So again, he's the oldest, remember. And naturally speaking, the birthright's his, the part to a double blessing, his to lose, and 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 the blessing, a double portion. I'm sorry, and the blessing of the inheritance, and the blessing is his to lose, the right to rule. But he's not showing himself. He's not showing himself after his father dies. He's not showing himself as a real leader here. So, but he is trying to deliver his brother, and perhaps again for the just kind of get back in his father's good graces, do something as far with it can commend him for. So now notice that when they do this, they strip Joseph of his coat, and that coat, of course, many colors, and that colors, many colors also speak of royalty, or also perhaps multiple rows. Like the priest was dressed in certain colors. We read about multiple colors, and so was a king. Okay, so perhaps, and it's a picture of Messiah here, priest and king, and of course the tallits we think of it. We think of that was gambled for. According to scriptures. They gambled for my vesture, my outer garment. And then so it is here. And and when they did that, of course, they take it off Messiah. Now Joseph's down in his underclothing, just like Messiah was without his garment. Perhaps they left his Messiah's underclothing on, or perhaps they took it off. It's not clear. Sometimes they would do that just for extra humiliation. But then it was a mess, and it was easy to clean up. They kept it on. So either way, Joseph's a picture of that. Okay, cast in the pit, just as Messiah was cast into the tomb. The tomb was empty. No body had ever been laid in it. And for Joseph's cake here, there's no emptiness explained, no water in it. Well, that water, of course, is important because Joseph's going to die in 3 days. If he doesn't, about 3 days, about how long you go without water, from that practical aspect. But there's also perhaps a very picture of water bringing life. The water of represent the Holy Spirit as well, perhaps. And the tomb is empty. The pit is empty. It's a place of death. Now we continue on and see the reaction as they do this. And they, in Genesis 37 verses, continue in Genesis 37, verse 25 to 29. They sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brother, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. His brethren were content. And there passed by Midianites, merchantmen. And they drew and lifted Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought him to Egypt. And Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. Okay, so they're eating down. Now remember, the Ishmaelites are descendants of their great grandfather, their great grandfather Abraham through Hagar. And these Midianites are also descendants of Abraham through Keturah, who had been Abraham's concubine and promoted their wife, as I explained before, after Sarai or after Sarah had died. So they're selling them to their relatives. Really, this is all inside the family here. You go back to Abraham, and they're selling to them, but they're now going to go to somewhere in Egypt. They brought them into Egypt. Egypt is no relation to these families, except for the Ishmaelites are related to the Egyptians because Ishmael's mother was an Egyptian, and he married an Egyptian. So there is a little connection there, but no connection ancestry wise to Joseph and his brothers. He's our flesh and blood. And notice how Judah here now is acting as the leader. And there's a content. Now, Judah has kept him from being killed. And his brothers are content. They got some money from this. A couple pieces of 20 pieces of silver. There's 10 of them. Two pieces of piece. About a piece of silver is considered a day's, kind of a day's wage. So, day would be, 150, depending on where minimum wages where you live, $150 each or something like that, So they're very, they're like, oh, that's better. So they're happy with this plan. Now, Reuben is notice he's going to carry out his plan. He's not with them when this occurs. He left thinking to come back. Remember when they weren't there and deliver Joseph out of the pit. But when Joseph's not there, he finds out and he rents his clothes. Now remember that pit's a picture of the tomb. And Messiah was not in the tomb. And remember, he's distressed about this. Joseph, well, also Mary Magdalene is distressed. Where have they taken my Lord's body? It's a picture of the empty tomb. Him being lifted out of that pit's a picture of of resurrection. And who do they sell him to? Gentiles. And 20 silver, the price of a slave was 30. So typical was 30. Of course, that's what the Midianites could probably get in Egypt, but they're not, they've not sold him out completely. And again, all the Jewish people have sold out Messiah completely, but he's been sold to the Gentiles. And Egypt's a picture of the world. Messiah has gone into the world, and many more Gentiles have accepted him than the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we continue on in Genesis 37, verses 30 through 36. We read the following. And he returned to his brother and said, the child is not, and I, where shall I go? Where shall I go? They took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of coats and dipped the coat in the blood. They sent the coat of many colors. They brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Know now whether this be your son's coat or no. And he knew it and said, this is my son's coat. And the evil beast has come as devoured him. Joseph without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. refused to be comforted, for he said, I will go down to into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, and a captain of the guard. Okay. So now Joseph, again, the child's not, where shall I go? Where will I go? He wants to go where Joseph's at. And again, those disciples, where I'm going, you cannot follow, but you'll follow later. Talking about we return to heaven. And Jude and Reuben, we shall see, will indeed go where Joseph's at later, in like manner. But notice this next part here. Paybacks are terrible, and this is more paybacks to Jacob. How did Jacob deceive his father Isaac when his eyes were not working well and they could not see? They killed a goat. His mother made false venison out of it for his father to kill his father's flesh. They took the skin from the goat and put on Jacob's arms, so that Jacob felt like a goat to fool his father. They put the cloak, the outer garments of Esau on Jacob, so he would smell like Esau. So he was deceived by the blood of a goat. He deceived his father by the blood of a goat, and by the clothing of his brother. Now he's being deceived by his own sons by the blood of a goat and the clothing of their brother. And now in these many days, he sent. Remember why did he send Joseph to Padan Aram? To get a wife. He doesn't come back for 20 years. How Isaac, at some point, Isaac expected him to come back. Wait for then. Perhaps all these same thoughts went through Isaac's head. Jacob's been devoured by an evil animal. He doesn't know where he's at. He believes he probably believed he was dead. His mother, payback Pharaoh, she never saw him again. In all this grief he caused, his father is now coming back on him. Is now coming back on him. Now, it ends with him going to Egypt, so Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. And that's very important, we'll see later. But his footsteps are being ordered by God, even if he cannot see it yet. The dream he had, God's already at work to bring it to pass. And he didn't make his brothers doing this evil thing, but God, it does not say in Romans 8:28 that God causes all things. He causes all things to work together for our good. And so we see here with Joseph. Now we continue on down in Genesis 39, verses 1 through 3. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which brought him down to there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. Okay, so Joseph's brought down there, and he's not actually harmed. Now we skipped verse 38, chapter 38, because we went over it last week. And if you remember, that was about Judah and his dealing with his son with Tamar. Okay, just to remind you, because they were focused on Joseph and the dreams. So Joseph here becomes prosperous, even in his slavery. Now, the master of the house can see this. Now, remember, Joseph is showing himself faithful. And he's showing himself faithful here, and God's prospering that. and it's the point where notice things are just getting better and better. Everything Joseph does ends up much better than what it was before he started. So we continue on here in Genesis 39, verse 4 through 6. And Joseph found grace in his sight and served him. And he made him overseer of his house and all he put on into his hand. And it came to pass in that time he had made him overseer in his house, all he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all he had in the house and in the field. For he left all he had in Joseph's hand. He knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So notice this. He found grace in his sight like Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Why? Because he served him. He served him faithfully. People are sometimes like, oh, yeah, I got the favor of God on me. But then they don't want to serve who they work for faithfully. They're like, there must not be nothing to that. No, you've got to do your part. He served him faithfully. Then he got promoted and made him overseer and put him over. And because he did that, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house. And the Egyptian notice he does and not just his house, but in the field also, whatever farmland the Egyptian owned or whatever, it's all being blessed under Joseph. And notice again the connection there, the field to crops. It's a theme we're going to see over and over again, particularly grains like wheat and barley, things that grow on the stalk, as we saw of Joseph. So, I mean, he don't have to do nothing but focus on being captain of the guard. Joseph is taking care of everything, but there's a problem for Joseph, and that he's goodly and well favored. Now, well favored means it's talking about his body being well formed, as the Hebrew actually says. Just like it is. So he's got a good looking body. It's well formed, but he also has a good looking faith. He's handsome and fit, and generally a good looking person. And he's not, and that's going to lead to problems for him. Again, he's done nothing wrong here. In Genesis, we continue on Genesis 39, 7 through 10, we read the following. And it came to pass these things, his master cast her eyes upon Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, my master knows not what was with me in the house, and he has committed all he has in my hand. And there's none greater in the house than I, because he kept back anything from me, but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass and spoke to Joseph day by day, hearkened not to her to lie with her, nor to be with her. Notice, now it's the lust of the eyes of this master's wife, and the lust of her flesh. She wants him. She wants to lie with him. That means to have sex with him. He's not going to do this. Why? First of all, his master's given him trust over everything and held nothing back from him except his wife. Because no man's going to share his wife. He's not going to do this great. So he's not going to repay his master good with evil. But secondly, he's not going to sin against God. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The secret to holiness is knowing every secret will be revealed. There really are no secrets. You will know, and God will know everything you've done. Everything you've done, you shouldn't have done. There's nothing you really can keep. There really are no secrets, and no one ever really gets away with anything. And Joseph understands this. But no, she's not content. I mean, she's Potiphar's wife. He's captain of the guard, a high official in the Pharaoh's court. And she is used to getting what she wants, and she she didn't stop at one time. No, she is going after him day by day. He's turning down this temptation day by day. And he was 17 when he came over. Hormones have kicked in. He's in his 20s. No late. He's no. He's 28 years old at the Otis. We'll show that in a minute. Okay, when this occurs, but perhaps a little younger, mid 20s. 25 at least. He's never been with a woman, and she's probably a trophy wife, being the way people do things. Probably true back then. What's true today? She's also very good looking, except we don't know that. We're not told anything about his wife, but we get the idea. And again, like Reuben with Bilhah, older than Joseph, most likely. And he's not. He's not going to do it because he fears God. That is the beginning of wisdom. And remember, we talked about we showed this extensively when we talked about wisdom with women. Solomon extensively says over and over again, basically, if a woman is willing to have sex with a man that she's not married to, she's up to no good. She wants something from the man, and it's going to destroy some aspect of that man's life if he gives in to it. Joseph is not going to do that. And the root from avoiding it is fearing God. That's how he overcomes his flesh here. Well, so he's been overcome, but now she's pulling out all the stops. She wants what she wants, and she is not used to not getting what she wants. So we continue on here in Genesis 39, 11 through 15. We read about her big play to get what she wants. And it came to pass about the son that Joseph went to the house to his business, and there was none of the men in the house therein. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand, fled, and got him. And it came to pass, he saw that she had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth. Then she called to the men of the house and spoke unto them. See, he has brought a Hebrew to mock us. And he came to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass when he heard I had lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garments with me and fled and got him out. Okay, notice that none of the men are in the house, but they're close by. She yells for him. Most likely, she sent him out of the house, just like we read about that woman in Proverbs who was enticing a young man and spent at least half a day getting things ready. I mean, she is scheming. And she comes out to him either dressed with wearing very, 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 very revealing clothing, or perhaps no clothing at all. And grabs him by his garment, perhaps from behind, pulling it off of him. I mean, she is determined to get what she wants here. This is about the pride of life. No one perhaps ever told her no. Joseph may not be the first one she's done this with. And I will show some reason. I'll show you some reason why that's at least we can at least suspect that in a moment. We'll look at something that perhaps indicates that she's tried something like this before or succeeded. But notice what Joseph is, he runs from sin. We're told to flee from all sin, especially fornication. And that's exactly what Joseph does. He didn't try to get his garment back from her. He's already seen more than he wanted to. And now, so he's done everything right. But what does she do? Falsely accuses him. And notice how she brings up the point he's a Hebrew. A bit of early anti-Semitism here. Now, how she know he's a Hebrew? by this time, the Hebrews, remember, relate to their Armenians, Syrians. That's why Jacob sometimes referred to as a Syrian, and they'd gotten their wives from there. But they've started developing their own. They don't look like the other people in Canaan. They're not Canaanites. But now after Jacob, they start intermarrying because there's no more godly wives to go back to, godly women to become wives back there where Jacob was, where Laban was. They've also gone into idolatry. So, but they look different than the other Canaanites for certain, and they have a different. They don't look like Syrians anymore either. Perhaps it picked up from the Canaanite dressing, what the way they dress, except that's different. And she knows the Hebrew, but that's now she's making an issue of the fact he's a Hebrew. She could have just said, "He brought this slave to mock me," but she's making an issue of the fact he's a Hebrew, and and so it is today. A Jewish person may actually do someone wrong, and people will not make an issue of the fact that they did wrong, but that they're a Jew. But perhaps they didn't even do the wrong thing, as often Hitler quoted all these, had people quote all these statistics, and they were just all bogus. Were there Jewish people who had killed, who had stolen stuff and whatever, and committed theft, without a doubt? Did they do it? Were they responsible for, say, 90% of theft, or 74%, or whatever numbers Hitler made up? They weren't even the same. They weren't even the same on every broadcast. Absolutely not. The issue, his thing was, they're Hebrew and therefore bad behavior, and that's exactly what she's going at here. And what does she say about Joseph? They mocked him. She came into lie of me. And she totally says this wrong. She totally lies about Joseph completely. And this can happen to you. It's happened to me, and it's happened to me more than once in a place. That's why I've always kept a friend of mine told me a long time ago to keep evidence, because people will do this in the workplace. They tell you not to do something, or they tell you to do something, or you advise against it or whatever, or you don't go along with it. It goes south on them, and they try to blame you. And it's no different today than it was back then, is what has occurred to Joseph here. In Joseph's case, he probably should have grabbed some other men to go with him in there, knowing she'd been doing this. Perhaps as he realized, but who knows, perhaps she was just calm as he came to the door. It's a little unclear, okay? Now, we're going to continue on with her scheme. That was her making this false accusation to the servants, to the other men of the house. Now, in Genesis 29:39, we continue on verse 16 through 20, and see about Potiphar and her action to him, and what says to him and his reaction. And she laid up her garments by her until his Lord came home. And she spoke to him according to these words, that says Lord Potiphar, saying, the Hebrew servant which you brought into us came to me to mock me, unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, I lifted my voice and cried, they fled his garment with me. He left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, he heard the master the words of his wife, which he spoke to him, saying, as his man did your servant to me, this wrath was kindled. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place of the king's prisoners bound, and there he was in the prison. Now, first of all, notice again how she brings out he's a Hebrew, not your servant, the Hebrew servant. Again, Satan knows that the people of the sins of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are who Messiah is going to come from. And also these other promises concerning them. If they can be destroyed, then Messiah, then his own doom can be put off, and basically he's won in this contest against God. And she's an idol worshiper. And those who worship idols worship devils, we're told. So she's got that anti-Semitic spirit about her and the accusations. But notice his now when Master hears this, he's very angry. But notice what he didn't do. He didn't kill Joseph. I'm not sure ancient Egyptian law, but a lot of places he probably could have done that. Being a slave, if it's like Roman law, I could have killed him just because he's a slave and he just, whatever reason, just didn't even have to have a reason. But he doesn't flog Joseph, which he certainly could have done. He puts him in the prison in the where the king's prisoners were. Remember, he's captain of the guard. He's in charge. He's over this prison as well. He didn't put him in a prison. And so why would he do this? Well, he knows where to get Joseph from. He can take Joseph back out of the prison if he wants to. And this all indicates he just can't do nothing. Because if his wife's accusation is true, he can't have Joseph in the house with her, except obviously. He can't appear weak to the other people like he's letting this slide. But it indicates he doesn't really trust his wife's words either. And he knows she's used to getting what she wants. And perhaps she's done something like this before. And he at least has suspicions that his wife is not being totally honest and trustworthy. And if she's bear false witness against Joseph, it's probably happened to someone else before as well. So Joseph's master did really nothing to hurt Joseph, but put him in prison in a place where, well, he could actually take him back out later. You know, a prison he's actually got some authority over and get him out of later if he wanted to. So we continue on in Genesis 39, 21 through 23, and read the following. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners were in the prison. And whatever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Okay, notice how Joseph, again, not trying to make things happen in his own hands. He probably had ample opportunity to try to run away and get back to Canaan. But that would have broken his master's trust. But Joseph is totally trusting the Lord. The Lord's with Joseph. Even in the midst of being thrown in the pit, the Lord was with Joseph. In the midst of this false accusation, the Lord's with Joseph. In being thrown into prison, the Lord's with Joseph. And it's no different with you if you are a believer, if you're a follower of Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus. Yeshua, if you want to use the Hebrew. Yeshua, if you want to use Aramaic. If you're his follower, the Lord's with you. It may look bad. It may have looked like it's gotten worse and worse. But the Lord has not abandoned you. He's not forgotten you. And if you'll cooperate with the Lord and continue to be faithful, faithfully serve, as we saw he did with Potiphar, his faithfulness is what keeps getting Joseph promoted. And notice his faithfulness. The keeper of the prison can see this. Yeah, he finds favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And just like he found grace in the sight of Potiphar. And notice how this the keeper of the prison, he don't have to do anything. He's letting Joseph take care of everything. And I'm not sure about ancient Egypt, but but there was usually a pretty stiff penalty for if the prisoners got away. In Rome, they killed the entire guard, the entire set of guards who were on duty, including the keeper of the prison. So, if one prisoner escaped, at least the keeper of the prison at the very minimum. So, there's some. He has to really, really trust Joseph to do this, and he's just going about his business and letting Joseph take care of everything, and everything's prospering. Joseph's finding ways to maybe keep the prisoners from fighting, and maybe make the prison, make improvements, and everything's just better under Joseph, because Joseph is faithful He has great character. If he showed perhaps a lapse in wisdom in telling about his dream to his brothers. Now we continue on, and we go to Genesis 40 verses 1 through 4. We continue on to read about Joseph and the dreams. There's getting ready to be some more dreams here now. All this has been just about his dreams, but now there's more dreams involved. And it came to pass of these things that the king of the butler, the king of Egypt, his baker, offended the Lord, their Lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh's wroth against two officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of bakers. And he put them in the ward in the house of the captain of the guard into prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in the ward. Okay, now here Potiphar's been in the house as captain of the guard. Joseph was his right hand man, and has undoubtedly been in the wouldn't say nothing, of course, or anything, but has been in the palace before, and they may recognize him from then. But now he's also in charge of the prison. And if we complain, this captain of the guard is Potiphar in a little bit. Okay, so now they're in the prison where Joseph is. And notice he's the captain of the guard, that's Potiphar's charged them, and he served them. He is serving these prisoners. He's taking care of them. And that's how Pharaoh, just like the captain of the guard, Potiphar has not brought judgment upon them yet. That's why they're in there. Their judgment often was either some sort of corporal punishment like flogging, a fine, or execution, or maybe being made being enslaved or something. Prisons were generally for holding people until judgment was determined. That's why it's a season in the ward. Now we continue on with these two, and we see about we're going to see the dreams are coming. More dreams are coming into play here as we continue on Genesis 40 verses 5-8. They dreamed a dream, both of them. Each man dreamed in one night. Each man, according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker, the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. And Joseph came upon them and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said to them, We have a dream to dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said to them, Do not interpretation belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. Okay, so notice again two dreams, as we saw earlier. Joseph had two dreams. Now there's two dreams here as well. We'll see that's a theme as we can continue looking at Joseph and the dreams. And that, but notice that they're troubled, and they don't have an interpreter. What are they talking about? They believe that there were people who were given a gift of interpretation for dreams, and there were schools of it by the magicians, by the magicians of Egypt, and the wise men of Egypt, and they had interpretation systems where you dream and you see a snake, it means this, and so on and so forth. Okay, and they would do this, and that's what they're talking about. And today you'll have people who call themselves believers, and they'll say, well, they have a gift of interpretation. But often, and they got the same system that they had in Egypt, came from Babylon ultimately, from the religion of Nimrod, that basically everything that's not following Messiah, it's not following the ways of God, came from this religion that Nimrod started. We've talked about before. And Joseph and the no one who's been trained in this and who has this gift of interpretation is there. But Joseph says that's not where interpretations come from. They come from God. And remember, Potiphar's has put him in charge over these two, and he take care of them, and he's been serving them. And he's built a rapport with them. That's what they're coming to him with their problems because he's been solving people's problems. So the chief butler begins telling him starts out to tell him his dream to see whether or not Joseph can really help him or not because he doesn't know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's an idol worshiper. But Joseph says that's who gives interpretations. So let's read here. Again, Genesis 40, verse 9 through 11. The chief priest told his dream, the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, a vine was set before me. And in the vine were three branches, and through it, as though it was budded. And their blossoms shot forth. The clusters there brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed in the Pharaoh's cup, and I gave his cup unto Pharaoh's hand. Okay. Well, so he tells this dream to Joseph, and he gives him all the details. And this thing here about these three branches and budded. I mean, it's like like motion, like time lapse photography. You may have seen where things look like they occur really quickly. That's kind of what it was like in his dream. It budded and flowers and then grapes. Okay. And in this interpretation system, they'd be trying to make some meaning out of the vine, and some they say, well, that means this, and the three branches, except three means something. Branches means branch means something. The blossom means something, and every little detail in this system. Okay, the cup and so on and so forth, and Pharaoh's. Some things be kind of okay with, but they come up with it, and perhaps he's expecting some long, perhaps somewhat vague interpretation. They can be taken one way or another, like these dream interpreters often gave from Joseph. But let's see what the interpretation. Remember that God is giving to Joseph. And see what Joseph tells him that. And Joseph says to him, this is the interpretation of it. The three branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up your head, and restore you to your place, and you shall deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when you were his butler. But think on me when it should be well with you, and show kindness, I pray, unto me, and make mention unto me, unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I am stolen away out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of the Hebrews. And here I have also done nothing. They should put me into the dungeon. Okay, so Joseph's innocent all around. But notice how short his interpretation is. The three branches are 3 days. The number 3 is the only thing significant about the fact they're branches. The cup is back in the hand, okay? But he doesn't make a deal out of every single little detail. Because the interpretations of God, it does match up with what I dreamed, but again, it doesn't make it. There's no mention of the vine, no mention of the whole budding process, except only the significant matters. The Pharaoh 3 days and he can be restored. Okay, short and to the point. Now, and then Joseph asked if this butler do something for him. Now he says something for the butler, and and he wants to get out of this house. Yeah, guards put him in charge, but prison's still prison, huh? Now Joseph as absolutely is going to be well with this guy and show kindness. Show kindness, Joseph, and think of him when it goes well with him. Don't forget me. That's why he's saying. And talk to your boss, Pharaoh. He's an officer of Pharaoh's. He's got direct connection to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is above Potiphar, and above Potiphar. Pharaoh Pharaoh can get him pardoned. You don't have to wait for Potiphar to decide where he's guilty or not. Or maybe Potiphar's gotten so used to Joseph taking care of his house and he even had time to look into it, because now he'd have to do all that stuff he had Joseph doing instead himself. And it was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. Okay, acknowledging, yes, the Hebrews are separate. But else he says the land stolen away. Okay, yes, his brothers sold him in slavery, except, and he's done nothing wrong to be put in the pit. He did nothing wrong to be sold into slavery. He did nothing wrong to cause him to go in this dungeon. But he calls, notice his faith, he calls the land of the Hebrews. Well, as we've seen, all they own, the Hebrews own, is that Jacob bought some parcel of land for 100 shekels of silver. We built a house in the booths, at Sukkot, and planned to settle down there, and planned to settle down there and live out the rest of his days in peace. But it's, paybacks are terrible. Like, it came out, his son screwed that up for him because of the way he did a bad job raising them by his own bad behavior, and he had to leave. And then Machpelah, the double chambered cave, 400 shekels of silver were bought for that, and the kind of a high amount for this field in this cave, where him and so far just him and Sarah are buried. I'm sorry, him and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca are there, or Rivka if you prefer to use the Hebrew. But that's all they own. So why is it called the land of the Hebrews? Because God promised to give the land of the Canaan, which is the land of the Canaanites, to Abraham, Isaac, to the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, whom Messiah would come through. So he has faith that God's going to bring about the interpretation that's from God, and he's going to bring about the promises he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Though there's no evidence of either at this point. He believes the word of God. Now we continue on in Genesis 40, verse 16 through 19. We read the following. When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I was also in my dream. Behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket there were all kinds of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered, this is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days, Pharaoh shall lift your head from off you and hang you on a tree, and the birds shall eat your flesh from off the tree. Okay, baked meats, baked goods, tied to what? Grain, right? Tied to grain. And we're going to see that. We're saying we saw with Joseph, the sheaves, okay, earlier. Grain, once again, is coming into play here. And notice Joseph doesn't assign something to everything like the color white. Okay. The interpretation is from God. And it's straightforward. 3 baskets, 3 days. Why baskets? Because he carried baskets. That's what he carried his baked products to Pharaoh in his court in. Okay. This is the birds, well, they're significant. They eat the flesh from him. And I want you to notice Joseph's faithfulness here. This chief baker saw that there was good. He hopes he's also his dream also signifies something good. And it doesn't. It signifies something terrible. But Joseph is faithful to give it anyways. He's not a people pleaser. He's not trying to tell people what they want to hear. He is faithful to God to give the interpretation that God gave him. Now, this is super important for building up his credibility and for the future here. As we see here in Genesis 40, verse 20 through 23, read the following. And it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, and they feast all of his servants and lift up the head of the chief butler and the baker among his servants. And they restored the chief butler unto his butlership again. They gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Pharaoh had, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay, 3 days have passed by since the interpretation of this dream. A little season's been in there. Pharaoh's done his investigation. You know, his initial anger is cool. Now, we don't know what they did to offend him. It doesn't tell us. But I mean, it had to be pretty serious to put someone to death over it. And it's possible that Pharaoh or his guest or someone got sick after drinking the wine, eating the bread. And, you know, perhaps it was an attempted poisoning. Perhaps it was just carelessness on behalf of someone's fault. But whatever the case was, Pharaoh determined the butler was innocent and put him back in his position again. But the baker, he found him guilty and destroyed him, just as he did, just as Joseph interpreted him. And it's important for us to tell people the truth. Those without Messiah are doomed. And us whitewashing, it's not going to help, because Judgment Day is coming, and they're going to get what God determines. It's going to be, as he says in his Torah over and over again, about what judges are to do, to acquit the innocent and punish the guilty. And that's exactly what's happened here. Now, the butler is undoubtedly ecstatic. I mean, relieved he's not gotten executed like the chief baker was. They apparently beheaded and hung up his body on a tree, eaten by the birds. Okay, he's ecstatic about that, but also he's got his job back. He's back in the Pharaoh's good graces, and he doesn't remember Joseph and what Joseph had asked him to do. Now, that we'll see in a moment. But perhaps his memory had nothing to do, his memory loss had nothing to do with that, or perhaps God knew how he was, or perhaps, you know, God's set up circumstances to get him distracted so he wouldn't, because it wasn't time for Joseph to come out yet. Joseph wanted out right now. Our time is always right now, particularly when we're going through something difficult. I mean, as Messiah said, your time is always now. But God's time is not our time. And we continue on, and we're going to see when God's time was here. In Genesis 41, verses 1 through 7. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came out of the river 7 well-favored kine, which are cows, okay? Cattle. It means cattle or cows, okay? And fat flesh. They fed on a meadow. And behold, 7 other cattle came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean flesh, and stood by the other cattle upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and the lean-fleshed cattle did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat cattle. So Pharaoh awoke. And he dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came upon one stalk, rank and good. And 7 thin ears, blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Remember, when it says corn, it means grain. Okay, we see the connection to grain again. We see the connection to grain. First, Joseph with the stalks bowing down. Okay. And remember, the Egyptians worshiped the sun, the moon, and the stars. We are told elsewhere in Scripture. A lot, you know, they had other deities, but their chief ones were those. Okay. You know, that back to that reference about there. And so, perhaps it gives us a clue about, a little bit of a clue about Egypt, perhaps, but to some degree, but also certainly about idolatry being involved. These are idol worshippers. And Joseph's first dream about the stocks. I mean, about the I'm sorry, about the sheaves, the butler, but the first interpretation between the butler and the baker, the good came first, then the bad, and the bad was connected again to what? Grain. Now we see two dreams. We see two dreams coming, and the second dream is again about grain and cattle, and it's about food in general. So we're going to see how Pharaoh responds to this dream, and then his response to the dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent out and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream. There was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth for a servant with his servants, and put me in the ward in the captain's guardhouse, both me and the chief baker. We dreamed a dream one night, and I and he, and we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was with us a young man, a Hebrew, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, he interpreted us our dreams. To each man according to his dream, he did interpret. And it came to pass as he interpret to us, so it was. He restored me to my office, and him he hanged. Okay, now notice, it's been 2 years, 2 full years. Pharaoh's birthday wrapped from then. So Joseph was in prison 2 more years. And on the third day, remember all this happened, just like the third day Messiah rose from the dead. The third day they came out of prison. There's a resurrection for everyone. Some to everlasting judgment, and some to everlasting everlasting salvation, and some to everlasting judgment, condemnation. And so they came, one into salvation, one into condemnation. Again, that third day speaks to resurrection, but now all that's gone, and 2 years have passed by. And we talked about these those 2 years also have a prophetic picture of 2,000 years. We talked about a long time ago. I showed charts and everything. I made showing this, how the history of humanity is divided into 6 before the tribulation is divided into roughly 1,000 day periods, each one 1,000 years of the day of the Lord. And those 2 years speak of those 2,000 years after the resurrection of Messiah, before the tribulation begins. So we're close, without a doubt, at this time. But also in Joseph's case, he had to wait 2 years. He had to wait 2 whole years. And now this is why the chief butler is my faults this day. He remembers him. Well, if he'd remembered him earlier, Pharaoh may have said, that's interesting. Pharaoh may have even pardoned Joseph. But then why? He's back in Potiphar's house. It wasn't the right time. Now, it was interesting. It's beyond interesting to Pharaoh. Pharaoh may have tried to put him in the court of magicians or whatever. Who knows? But Pharaoh now needs this dream. It's bothering him. And he's went to the dream interpreters, the magicians and the wise men, who've used that system of dream interpretation. And they've looked at all these details, and they can't put them together anything that makes any sense. And, and particularly troubling about these dreams is about this thing of the cattle eating other cattle. Cattle, or like I said, out there in the meadow, feeding in the meadow, they don't eat flesh to start with. But then when they do, if they did, the thin ones, the terribly thin ones, didn't get any bigger. They cannot make heads or tail of this dream with their dream interpretation. Now Pharaoh really wants to hear. And I want you to notice he brings out a Hebrew again, distinctly different than the Canaanites. But perhaps also, people also sometimes do this, think that someone's Jewish, they got some sort of in with God, believers, the Gentiles can't get. And there's perhaps a little bit of that as well, which is simply not true, by the way, according to Scripture. Jew and Gentile want a Messiah. Yes, there's some things like being Messiah that only a Jew could do. That's true. But God's no respecter of persons. It's a matter of seeking after him. And you've been grafted. If you're a Gentile, you've been grafted in. And if you're a Jew, you're not better. You're not better than the Gentile. But nonetheless, there's a little bit of that, maybe we wouldn't call it any, but kind of a problem here with an extra expectation because he's a Hebrew. And that's because they're supposed to be the people of God, but again, they're not automatically guaranteed to see someone's a Jew and they're living according to God and in touch with God. Joseph's brothers certainly weren't. And he tells him, reminds Pharaoh of the track record of Joseph. So now Pharaoh's really interested in hearing what Joseph has to say. So we continue on, and we see Pharaoh's continued response here. And we're looking at Joseph's response to him here in Genesis 41, verse 14 through 16. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. They brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself and changed his garment and came into Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I dreamed a dream, and there's none that can interpret it. For I have heard of thee that you can understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Okay. Notice Pharaoh's now bringing Joseph there. Don't remember what words of Yeshua. Don't try to put yourself up higher. Go, if you're called to a feast, go lower, and then let yourself be called up higher, and you'll have honor of all men. Joseph's gonna have honor of all these people because they see Pharaoh sitting for him and bringing him up. And notice Joseph, even though they brought him out hastily, he takes time to change and shave and change his garment. He knows the court procedures of Egypt, of Pharaoh. He knows what's expected. Again, that's because he worked for Potiphar. That gives us evidence that he knew that he'd been in the court of Pharaoh before. He'd been being prepared for these 13 years now, for this moment. And he knows how to conduct himself. And Pharaoh says that, admits that none of these people using these dream interpretation systems can interpret this dream. And he believes Pharaoh that Joseph has some gift of dream interpretation. But what's Joseph say to him? It's not in me. Joseph does not claim a gift of dream interpretation, but God is going to give Joseph an answer of peace. An answer that's going to make sense of it all. God's going to give it to Joseph. Joseph's going to give it to Pharaoh. But Joseph doesn't give himself the middleman the credit. He gives God the credit. And it's like I've had people who've testified, even a friend recently, that I prayed for them or laid hands on them and they got healed. And I've told these people, I've never healed anyone. I followed God's instructions. God healed you. Even to the point of my son, who was dead from COVID, God raised him from the dead. I prayed, fancy English word for begged, asked, old English word for okay. God did this, and Pharaoh and Joseph is doing the same thing. He's directing Pharaoh to God for his answer, not to look to not to look to Joseph himself. Now we continue on here in our last section here in Genesis, beginning of Genesis 31, 41. If we continue on in verse 17 through 21. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, behold, I sit on the bank of the river. Well, there came out of the river seven cattle, fat fleshed and well favored, and they fed in a meadow. And I saw seven other cattle come up after them, poor and very ill favored, and lean flesh, as I never saw in the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill favored kind did eat up the first seven fat kind. And when they'd eaten him up, it cannot be known they'd eaten him, for they were still ill favored as at the beginning. So I awoke. So he's telling him the same dream we saw earlier, but there's a few more details. Pharaoh's on the bank of the river, that'd be the Nile. I perhaps he mentioned that earlier, but this part about never so bad he never seen it like it in Egypt. I mean, these cattle were totally emancipated. Their ribs showing, except, huh? Poor and ill favored. I mean, they look sick and weak and everything else. And he tells us this strange thing about them eating, and how could they eat something that's bigger than them and not and look and still look no different. And he woke up. Now he's going to tell about his second dream. And as we continue on Genesis 41, verse 22 through 27. And I saw in my dream, behold, seven ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, and thin and blasphemous east wind sprung up after them. And the seven thin ears devoured the good ears. I told this to the magicians, and then they declare it to me. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dream of the Pharaoh is one. God has showed him what he's about to do. The seven good cattle are 7 good years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. The seven thin and ill-favored cattle that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty years, blast of the east wind, shall be 7 years of east wind shall be 7 years of famine. Now, first of all, what about this east wind? In Egypt, ancient Egypt, you got the Nile in the Delta particularly, and around the Nile is the land, they use irrigation and whatever, and there's land. There's the Egyptian desert, the Sahara's on one side, the Egyptian desert's on the other, and the wind could be blowing across there. Well, let's say even from perhaps the air started off in India, goes across Saudi Arabia, across the Arabian desert, maybe across the where Egypt you are, and across Sinai, and across the Egyptian desert, and it's being dried out the whole time, and it was considered, and it could dry up a crop, okay. Even though they got irrigation, it can dry up the top of the crop where the grain is, the ears of grain are. And of course, we know that when the Holy Spirit, there's something indicates something supernatural, okay, occurring here. And notice it's blasted. It's not just, it's like we have in direcos out here in Oklahoma, where like Father's Day, we had one for 2 hours. It blew 90 to 100 miles an hour. No tornado, not a hurricane or nothing, just straight line winds blowing along this giant long line that went about 200 or 300 miles long on everyone on our side of that line was hit with this till it passed over us. That's what it's talking about. This east wind is a crop destroying wind. Okay. So this important to understand. And Joseph understands right away. Notice he mentioned the famine with the wind. Okay. The 7 again is years, not days. He knows it's years. Why? It's a yearly crop, right? And notice there's a little detail about the ears also eating up the old ones. And those other, he told to them, he brings up to Joseph again. He told to the dream interpreters, and they could not interpret the dream. And notice how directly here Joseph assures Pharaoh, first of all, assures him it's no ordinary dream, that God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. That this dream is from God. He doesn't, the Egyptians attributed dreams to all kinds of things, perhaps even some of their gods in some cases. But this is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who gave you this dream. And often leaders, even today, are directed by dreams. It often doesn't always come out. It doesn't always come out, but God gets rulers to do whatever he wants. Their heart is in his hands, as like water in a canal, where he can make it go wherever he wants. And that's one of his methods. And that's what Joseph's telling him. But he's not done here. That's not the entire interpretation of the dream. And in Genesis 41, verse 38 through 32, we continue on with this. This is the thing which has spoken to Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he shows in the Pharaoh. Behold, there are 7 years of great plenty coming through all the land of Egypt. There shall arise of them 7 years of famine, and all the plagues shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plague shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it is very grievous. For all that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Okay. Why does he mean by it's doubled to him twice? Well, he had two dreams, but in each dream, two events, right? The good followed by the bad, the good followed by the bad, just like the baker's dream, which was good for the baker. The butler's dream, which was good for the butler, followed by the baker's dream, which was bad for the baker. That same pattern here. And God's showing this to him. Why? To scare Pharaoh? No, to prepare Pharaoh. He's letting him know what's going to happen. Great plenty, the fat cows, the full stocks. And why cattle? They're in the meadow. They graze on grass. A lack of grass? When you don't have grass, you feed your cattle grain, like grain pellets, whatever. If you can do that. That's another option. But if you don't have either, they're going to end up looking like it. They're going to end up looking like like they're starving and get disease and all kinds of problems. So the details are in there twice. The dreams are twice, two different dreams and signify the same thing. Established by God, and God's going to bring it to pass. God is doing this for his own purposes. And it's not to harm the Egyptians. It's not to harm Pharaoh. It's to bring about the promise he made to Abraham, or the word he'd given to Abraham. Well, ultimately about the plan to bring the salvation to the whole human race. But remember, in that plan was 400 years, two events would occur in those 400 years. You'll be in a land that's not your own. True about Canaan, true about Egypt when they first get there, and you'll be enslaved. It's not they're enslaved for 400 years. People commonly quote. It's that the whole period of those two things is 400 years. And that's borne out. I've shown this before. It's borne out in the Torah itself. It's borne out. It's borne out, in the New Testament as well. Even the rabbis. It was never 400 years of slavery. It's 400 years altogether. But to bring that about, Jacob has to. The sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have to move to Egypt. How are they going to get there? Jacob, we'll see, has no intention of going to Egypt. Abraham went, didn't go well. Isaac went, didn't go well. Okay. He ain't about to go. He ain't about to follow make their mistakes. So God is going to draw him to Egypt. But Pharaoh can't see this. So Joseph has now interpreted the dream of Pharaoh. and explained the problem. Well, he hasn't done, but Pharaoh needs a solution to this problem. And that's where we're going to pick up when we resume next week with Joseph giving them a solution, not just good news, bad news. Here, here's the problem. You got this, you're going to have this huge problem, but a solution for it as well. Because God does not give us just bad news, that we have a problem. Our problem being sin, and the wages of sin being death. But he has given us a solution as well. That solution is Messiah dying in our place, us putting us making him Lord, putting him in charge of our lives, and we'll be saved from the penalty of our sin. He has not just goes, the problem is sin, the solution is Jesus, Yeshua. Until next week, shalom.